Hello, it's Neil Romanek from the Flint, and welcome to the Flint Podcast. And I'm very excited today to have with us Steve Smith from Picture Zero, among many other places. Hello, Steve.
Hello, hi, good to see you.
Very, very happy to have you here. You're one of the people, the few people I talk to who seems to uh, express the appropriate degree of panic when when the topic of climate change and sustainability is brought up. A lot of people I will talk to will go, "Boy, yeah, sustainability," but you actually s- appear to understand what's at stake kind of at a deeper level than most, it seems to me. Can maybe tell, I mean, we know, I think, a bit about your career already because you worked in the Graham Norton Show and a lot of other things, but maybe talk just a bit about your career, and also how you came across sustainability and the environmental crisis and kind of where that's brought you now.
Brilliant. Well, I guess I sort of kind of became more concerned about the planet and the climate when I moved out of London into the countryside. And I actually realized that we've lived where we do in Wiltshire now for nearly 23 years. So about 20 years ago. And I guess it's that weird thing when you live in a city, you're kind of not so connected to nature, and moving out into the countryside, suddenly being connected to nature and seeing weird things going on, seeing kind of frogs coming at the wrong time of year to lay frog spawn, and sort of seeing rivers that should be flowing drying up, and seeing kind of how frosts at untimely times of the year would sort of damage kind of, the buds on fruit trees and all this kind of stuff. So I was suddenly much more aware that nature was kind of not handling the climate change very, very well. And that got me thinking about my role in the TV industry. And it was around the same time that Albert started. So Albert, I think, started about 12 years or so ago. And I was sort of thinking about, what more could I do around sustainability in the film and TV industry? And then Albert started. So I sort of contacted them and said, how can I support you? What can I do to help? And it very quickly became apparent that one of the things they wanted to do was sort of train the industry. So I sort of volunteered as a sort of Albert trainer. So I come from a directing background. That's what I've done throughout my entire career. So I've been directing probably for kind of well over 30 years. And so in between my sort of freelance directing commitments, I sort of did some Albert training. So that meant I had to get up to scratch. So I became a qualified carbon literacy trainer. And that sort of suddenly kind of brought me full face with the facts around climate change and the climate crisis and what was going on. And so that's what I did. So for many years, I would sort of help support Albert training the industry. And, Albert has been hugely successful doing that. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of people in our industry that have had some sort of climate training as a result of that. And I think in many ways, the UK has led the way on this with the screen sector, thanks to Albert. Um, but a few years ago, I guess I sort of felt that we needed to move the conversation on a bit further than that. I thought there were still opportunities to do better storytelling on screen. It's not just a question of training the industry to be more sustainable, but how do we use our power on screen to change behavior? And I felt time to start leading by example. So we set up Picture Zero a couple of years ago, initially to be a sort of a climate storytelling production
Mm.
company. And we very quickly made a documentary called The People versus Climate Change, which followed the UK's first ever Citizens' Assembly on climate change, which was fascinating. But as we were sort of doing that, we were also being approached by people to try and give sustainable production support to productions. And so actually over the last sort of year or so, that's what we now do more of. We are
Mm.
very much focused on being a consultancy that provides sustainable production support to lots of different sectors. Whether it's kind of production companies at a sort of corporate level of support, or working with broadcasters, or working specifically on productions. We do a whole range of things. And then also, we specialize in helping people tell better stories about climate change. So
Mm.
one of the things that we've done over the last year working with Nesta, who are kind of a fantastic sort of organization. Nesta basically are an agency for innovation agency for social good, and they've been funding something called the Greener Homes project that we've been doing, which is recognizing that as we decarbonize, as we electrify everything, how do we make sure that people in our industry know what those new stories about how we're going to be using our homes are?
Hmm.
And how do we tell those stories authentically? So we've just been we've created a resource called the Greener Homes Handbook, which is an online resource. You can very easily go to it at greenerhomestv.co.uk. And that's
Hmm.
a resource-rich kind of handbook that gives advice to the industry about how you tell authentic stories about decarbonisation. What does it look like on screen? What are the houses of the future going to look like? What are the kind of other stories that you can tell around community, about skills and jobs and all those things that are related to that just transition? So that's really exciting. We're also doing a kind of cookery project at the moment as
Hmm.
well, trying to help cookery shows decarbonize. Again, how do we make those shows greener, but also how do we think about the opportunities to inspire audiences to change through what they show on screen? How do we get the nation away from using gas hobs, which is
Hmm.
supporting a fossil fuel, to using induction hobs? Every professional chef that you speak to uses induction hobs in their kitchens. And
Oh
yet,
yeah.
as a nation, we're still addicted to cooking on flame. And of
But
course,
haven't those shows actually been used to sell gas cooking to people in some cases?
I don't know whether the shows are used to sell gas cooking to people, but I'm sure the fossil fuel industry like the fact that gas is being shown on screen. What's really fascinating, and I didn't realize this until recently, but there's been a lot of science done recently around the kind of health concerns around using gas in your home, because gas also kind of can produce particulate matter and nitrogen oxides. And what's interesting is it's a bit like kind of having a passive smoker in the house, because that
Hmm.
gas can be leaking and you can be breathing that in. So there are some really good health reasons as to why switching to an induction hob is a better, safer thing to do. And of course, one of the challenges is that house builders, I think, probably use the fact that we have traditionally cooked on gas as a reason to continue to put gas in new buildings. We don't have an emotional connection to how our homes are heated, particularly as long as the heating system works. I think people don't really care whether it's gas or electric or whatever. But actually, once a house builder puts a gas stove in a house for you to cook on, they may as well have a gas boiler to heat your home and to heat the hot water.
Hmm.
So how do we sort of, you know, stop that demand by encouraging people to kind of go, well, we don't want gas cookers, we want induction ones. So, that's a really interesting point. So
Yeah.
actually, I think the work I'm doing at the moment feels kind of very diverse, very creative, working in lots of different areas and different sectors.
That's interesting because the home as well is certainly for the industry, for all of us, the home is also the workplace now. And
Yeah,
uh and there's talk of like, well, you're working at home, so how does that change how does that affect your carbon footprint, or how does that affect sustainability of your workplace? And then also how does that affect your mental health? And there's a whole range of things that come with that, your home being a place where you work now.
yeah. I mean, home has been central, hasn't it, to storytelling? It's such an important narrative, whether it's in soaps or whether it's in DIY makeover shows or reality shows. Homes are just central to this. So, and now as you add that dimension of now working from home as well, and I guess it's challenging, isn't it? I mean, I appreciate. I mean, I work from home a lot. I live in Wiltshire near Marlborough. And I think what's interesting is that whilst there might be some arguments that some London cafes have seen a sort of reduction in footfall as people don't go into London to work in offices, locally, our local shops, I think, have
Mm.
seen the benefits of that, because, if you're working from home, you're more likely to kind of visit your local high street. And so perhaps there are some sort of benefits from that. I mean, I used to spend, you know, quite regularly. It's a 2 hour drive from home to London. In the old days when I used to kind of commute regularly, that would be 4 hours of driving often
Mm.
on my own. Not a great carbon footprint doing that. I mean, I use the train as much as I can do, but as you know, working in the film and TV industry, you often work unsociable long days and long hours, and there aren't always train services available at the times you need to get to work. So it's not always
Mm.
easy to travel on public transport. So
Um,
I think working from home has
okay.
reduced my personal emissions quite considerably.
Well, yeah, sure, sure. The so and then at Picture Zero, so you said there's a wide variety of sectors. They're outside of media and entertainment
No,
as well.
all media and entertainment. So, but I guess what I'm sort of saying is that we do such a wide variety of work. So, on a basic level, we support lots of productions reducing their carbon footprint. So, in some situations, we'll have a full-time sustainability coordinator actually working on a production, supporting that production reduce its impact, and also looking for editorial opportunities.
Mm.
So that's really fascinating. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is ensuring that we get really accurate data to back up what we're doing. So making sure that any carbon footprints that we produce are really thorough and accurate. And then on other levels, we might work with broadcasters and streamers. So we might do some sort of work directly supporting some of their projects. We also are increasingly working with indies at a corporate level. I think what's really fascinating is over the years of seeing Albert has generally focused at recording footprints at program level, at production level, because that's something you can measure. And I think one of the things that we've neglected is working at company level. And so what we're trying to do at Picture Zero is by working with an independent production company at their company level, we can make sure that they've got these really robust sustainability policies in place that then filter down to all the productions that they make.
Mm.
And I think that's when it comes to sort of changing culture and also ensuring that companies are able to report their kind of corporate footprints, that has been sort of really, really essential to do. And then also just working with companies over establishing really good carbon data accountancy kind of principles so that you're making sure you're tracking the data you need. What I guess has happened over the last couple of years is as broadcasters and streamers are possibly slightly panicking about meeting their net zero targets that they set
Mm.
out, they're recognizing that we need to get everybody, all the suppliers we work with in our industry, to sort of follow that similar sort of process. So, you know, um, trying to encourage production companies to set their own sort of science-based target or net zero target,
Mm.
trying to provide to encourage suppliers to do all that. And obviously, if you're a big broadcaster, then you've often got your own in-house sustainability team to help you do that. But if you're a smaller SME, then you sometimes need some help and support to work out where to start.
So I was just talking to somebody actually in a previous call about that. How do you get things to change, and how do you get an industry that is, very much used to doing things in a certain specific way that it's done forever and ever. How do you get people to change, but especially on productions and in crew, where your crew's designed to jump into a situation, not know each other at all, and then function perfectly for the duration of the shoot and then leave because they've honed and practiced a certain set of skills. So how do you actually start to get changes in the way people do things, when they're under budget, under time?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it's recognizing that as you say, crews start at different times on a production schedule, and again, they often are willing to want to try and work more sustainably, but they don't always have the bandwidth or the time to sort of research the latest suppliers or the latest tech that can help them do this. So, I think key to our success is trying to start really early. So we try to
Mm.
engage with the production at the earliest possible point in pre-production. And what we're having really great success with is trying to convene HOD kickoff calls as early as you possibly can, get all of the sort of heads of department from a production on a call in the same room together and start sort of talking about what those kinds of production hotspots are. What are the problem areas, and then how do we go about kind of collaboratively working to sort of solve them? What are the things that HODs feel that they can already do without any support? Where are the areas that they need support from? And understanding a little bit about the sort of this sort of technology that's available to support. What's really fascinating is that over the last few years, there's been a lot of research around portable power. Our
Mm,
industry, if you're on location, you need to power your equipment somehow. And if you're in a field in the middle of nowhere, you need to have portable power. Um, what is interesting is that the data that we've got from kind of case studies that companies like Picture Zero do is sort of showing that we are now routinely overspecking the size of our generators. We
mm,
we we do that because I think we have a fear of running out of power in our industry, but also because we generally do what worked well for us on the last production. So if the last production had a 200 kVA generator and that was all fine, then you go, that's what we need on the next production. And we're not very good at actually sitting down and actually going, what is our power demand on a production? What do we actually need and what are we going to use? Now, the problem with a generator, which I don't know whether many people realize this, is that unless you run a generator at something like 80% of its capacity, it's running
mm,
inefficiently and you're using more fuel than you need and creating more emissions routinely. And we now have evidence that proves this and demonstrates this. We've got data from productions that prove it. Routinely, we might have a 200 kVA generator and we're only using 20% of its capacity.
mm,
And that's madness. It's costing us more because we're having a more expensive generator than we need. We're using more fuel than we need, and we're creating more emissions. So actually, now that we've got evidence, when we have our kickoff calls with the productions, I can say to nervous facilities and location managers, you don't need that size generator. I'm telling you, we can
mm,
we can
mm,
do it with a smaller generator, or we can then, which is what we ideally want to do, we can do it with a battery instead, or we can do it with the battery hybrid generator. And and what's fascinating is how quickly the industry, I think, is responding to that and changing. Once you start seeing a system like that working well, then you kind of are committed to doing it in the future. So we're currently supporting a medium-sized feature film at the minute, and we've been
mm,
using a hybrid generator on it for powering our unit base. And the facilities team have been blown away. They've never done this before, and they're just going, we can't get over just how efficient this is. So the battery is running the power for the unit base around sort of 70 to 80% of the day. And we are looking like we're saving around 55 to 60% of the fuel we would normally be using by just
mm,
running everything more efficiently. And when, a litre of HVO or diesel will cost you £1.30, £1.50 a litre, if you can save yourself 1,000 litres of fuel a week, that suddenly adds up and it's money you can spend elsewhere on screen. It's
mm,
sort of,
mm.
so it makes financial sense to do this as well as environmental sense.
So are you where are you? I know you're doing a lot of your own research, but where are you getting a lot of the data that you need? And because there is a lot of this seems like there are a lot of unknowns out there, and sometimes you're doing things probably maybe even for the first time. People haven't sort of asked, well, exactly what is going on here, and you're having
Yeah.
to dig around and fact find.
Well, when it comes to power, there are lots of ways you can get data. I mean, one of the things that we try to install with productions is to set up a very simple system of just logging. Every time you put fuel into a generator, log it, write it down so that we've got a
Mm,
record of how many liters of fuel went in it, what date, what time of day. And so just knowing that you've got that record of fuel usage is really good. But again, telemetry, I can't say it very well, telemetry, which
mm,
is sort of the way of being able now to get live data from generators. So most of the new stage 5 generators now have the ability to provide real-time data that you
mm,
can log into a sort of website and sort of collect that. So you'll see things like your peak load of power that you're using and sort of, how many hours the generator was running. And then likewise, any batteries that you kind of pair the generator up with also have the ability to provide you with that telemetry data. And so basically then doing a lot of analysis, so,
Mm.
trying to work out what we try to do is work out how many kilowatt hours you get per liter of fuel. Now, traditionally, with an old sort of generator working the way we used to, you would get kind of basically 1.5 kilowatt hours of power for a liter of fuel. What we're finding is by analyzing the fuel usage and the way our hybrid generators are working, we're getting around 3 to 3.5 kilowatt hours of power for a liter of fuel. So you can suddenly see, you're getting, nearly 3 times the efficiency of power for the same amount of fuel that you're using. So, collecting that data, being able to analyze it, and then being able to show what works, we can all then learn from it and find new ways of working.
And that's probably not something that that is widely understood. A lot of the nuances there. I mean, it's like, well, should we do it, it's diesel or electric? One costs more and one is greener, and we maybe, that seems to be
Yeah.
the only there's that kind of a vague green thing, but that maybe is as deep as the understanding goes sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I would say, the first rule if you're filming with portable power on location is spec your generator correctly. Just by going from a 100 kVA generator perhaps to a 60 kVA generator, you will save fuel if you're running that generator more efficiently, and that will save you fuel. Then the next thing I would be saying is if you have got a generator and you're having to use a generator, ensure you're using HVO, hydrotreated vegetable oil, which is a waste project. I can't speak. Hydrotreated vegetable oil, which is a waste product made from waste cooking oil, and that reduces the sort of life cycle carbon emissions by about 90% compared to using diesel.
So
And
nobody
then
should be using diesel at
no, I mean,
all.
HVO fuel is now readily available. The price difference is stabilizing, I think. It can cost you a bit more than diesel, but I would argue that the emission savings are worth doing it. Um, the trouble is we mustn't get addicted to HVO. HVO is only a transition fuel to kind of see us through moving entirely away from generators through to electricity and batteries. It's a transition fuel. But I would say right now, if there's a choice between using diesel or HVO, you should be using HVO because it's less damaging. There are some concerns around the supply of HVO and whether or not there's a risk that things like palm oil get into the kind of mix. So you have to make sure it's certified and that you're getting it from a trusted supplier. Um, but I would say that that's something that's really quite important. We can do that right now. I mean, what's interesting is I think we've made so much progress now with decarbonizing the power supply, and there are ways that we can reduce the impact from it. That when I look at Albert footprints now, where power was often kind of a sizable chunk of your footprint, I think now the main problem we need to tackle is transport.
Mm,
Transport on a big scripted drama production can be 75% of your footprint.
mm,
And I'm now finding that we can reduce the footprint and the emissions from power so that the next area are things like materials that you need to focus on. So actually, you know, if you can try and implement the new ways of working around power generation, you can kind of tackle those emissions quite effectively now.
mm,
We've got the tech, we've got the battery solutions, the ability to plug into mains power where you can do that. The fact that LED lights require less energy means that, if you're using LED lighting, you don't need so much power to power them.
mm,
So all of those things are possible now. So for me, the big challenge is how do we kind of deal with transport and how do we reduce
mm.
those transport emissions?
And is the answer that you just stop flying and you get local people?
Yeah, I mean, trying to plan where you're going to work and where you're going to film, if you can
Mm,
plan to work close to public transport hubs, that helps. I mean, it's really interesting that I've just recently supported uh, a production that did an event in central London. And of course, the transport emissions for that event were tiny because most of the crew were using the tube and the train, but
mm,
again, if you're filming out on location, a big scripted drama, and you're in a field in the middle of the countryside, miles away from any transport networks, then people are going to be driving. And generally, we drive petrol and diesel cars, and they're
mm,
single occupancy. And so, that's a huge challenge for us. How do we find ways of dealing with that? Again, lots of electric vehicles are now coming onto the market. There's innovations with EVs every day. We're now starting to see big trucks becoming available as well that we can start
mm,
using. The charging infrastructure is okay in some big towns and cities, more challenging if you're working kind of remotely. But then again, it's possible to get portable EV charging infrastructure that you can. I know this doesn't sound it sounds counterintuitive, but um, plugging an EV charging point into a generator isn't as crazy as it sounds, because
mm,
if your generator is under spec'd, it's much better that you kind of plug an EV charging point into it and use your generator at a maximum capacity to charge a vehicle as well as power your unit base, as to just
right.
leave it working at 20% of its capacity inefficiently. So again, how can we use portable EV charging and connect them to generators, or
Mm,
or connect them ideally to batteries if you've got them on location to sort of charge vehicles?
mm,
um, you know, we're starting to see the possibility of getting EV minibuses, for crew
mm,
transport. So there are things that we can do. I mean, one of the biggest challenges, I think, is that most of the unit drivers and transport captains are often owner drivers. And
mm,
obviously, if you own a petrol vehicle, and you bought it a couple of years ago and it's on a sort of lease, then trying to ask them to very quickly move to an EV is difficult. You have to wait till the end of that sort of vehicle cycle, and when they get their next vehicle. But I'm hoping that by trying to work with transport captains and unit drivers now, and giving them an opportunity to test drive some EVs, that hopefully the next time they change their vehicle, they'll move to an electric vehicle, which is what
mm,
our industry is crying out for. I mean, I would say right now, if you're a transport captain or a unit car driver that's got an EV, you will be very much in demand, because
mm.
that's what productions are calling for.
Interesting. So, there's a lot of talk, and sort of Albert, of course, is focused on production and kind of how do you kind of decarbonize production. But there are a lot of facilities, and a lot of production takes place now in the cloud. The cloud is a big part of kind of everything we do now. Even we're having this conversation on Zoom, and it's essentially happening in the cloud. Um, and how are you looking at crunching some of those numbers around around, I guess, the digital sides of production? So if I'm a animation house, I'm probably burning huge amounts of electricity all the time,
Mm,
just because of all the assets I have stored in the
mm,
cloud somewhere, probably in
mm.
Ireland or who knows where. Um, and so how are you advising companies to start assessing that, or deciding,
Y-
making decisions around that?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, it's something that we've not done a huge amount of work in. We're doing a lot of work on the production side of projects, but less so in the sort of the post side. I think it's something that our industry needs to sort of come together and start trying to gather the data. I mean, I think it's one of those areas that we don't yet have enough data to really know how big the problem is. I mean, I suspect it's quite significant. And it's interesting that at the moment, with Albert's carbon footprints, the only thing that Albert is asking productions to report on is what the energy tariff is of the facility house you're editing in. Is it
Hmm.
a 100% renewable tariff, or a sort of, or not? And we're not yet routinely, and how many days you work in that facility. We're not yet routinely kind of collecting data on servers and cloud-based systems. And I think when we do, we will probably get quite a big shock. I think it will have
Hmm.
quite a big impact. I know, also, a lot of those companies that do that kind of work, you can work globally. We've got quite a lot of brilliant animators and visual effects people that work in places like India.
Mm,
They've got really skilled people out there. But of course, if you're outsourcing your sort of special effects and visual effects work and animations to somewhere like India, there's a lot of fossil fuel on that grid. So the kind of electricity in India won't be as sort of green as the kind of electricity that we've got in the UK. And at the moment, I don't think we're measuring that either. So
mm,
I would say that the industry needs to come together and start sort of working out how we accurately measure it. And once we know the scale of the problem, it's easier to find solutions. And again, this is presumably a huge direction of travel, isn't it? As AI kicks in, as we do more kind of virtual production and stuff like this, servers are going to become a much bigger part of our industry. I mean,
mm.
I know that some of the sort of I gather that some of the big streamers, will have service centers in places. I think I'm right in saying that Amazon, I think, had a service center in the Arctic because again, you're benefiting from that natural cooling from the environment, which means that
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
not using as much heat, as much air conditioning rather to cool things.
Mm,
So there are servers, aren't there, that are sort of under the ocean, so you're using the sort of the kind of the water to kind of cool them rather than
mm.
power. And again, bringing that home decarbonization thing. There are also innovative projects where I think servers are using their excess heat to help heat and warm things like swimming pools
Yeah,
and
that's right.
houses, which are really exciting. So there will be solutions that we can find to sort of work in a more environmentally friendly way,
Mm.
where we can have servers and also use that heat productively to warm our homes.
Yeah, because of course it's, you've got all this heat coming off servers and it's an
Capture it,
asset
use
you
it.
can
Yeah.
use. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so also at Albert, of course, you oversaw the studio sustainability standards. And it'd be great to kind of hear about that, just maybe get an introduction to what the standard is. And it's in its second year now, or I guess starting your third
Oh, it's
year.
third year, starting its third year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
yeah, I briefly did some consulting work for Albert where I looked after a project called the Studio Sustainability Standard. And the idea for that was something that really came from the industry. So studios wanting to create a way that they could sort of measure accurately their footprint and have a kind of model for finding a way of sort of making progress to help their facility become a zero carbon, zero waste facility. And so the standard was created with the input of lots of studios. And basically, it's a measuring tool. There's a sort of scorecard built into it, which asks a series of questions around things like climate, which is around, your energy use at the studio, circularity, how they manage waste, how they look after nature at the studio, sort of people and management, how the studio make it a people-friendly place, and also what kind of management processes they have to make sure that they're, reviewing their progress, tracking their data. And also it captures data. So the scorecard, asks studios to report on energy use, waste use, water use, all these kind of things. So we get robust data. And basically, off the back of what studios are doing, they get a rating from. It's a bit like I was going to say an Ofsted rating because
mm,
which I know is now just changed, but it was basically a rating from basically outstanding, excellent, good, very good, pass, I think, with the sort of six different categories. And basically, it allows
and
studios
participated, wasn't there? Just,
participated. That was it. Yeah.
you got
So
a
at the
ribbon for
basic level.
participating.
Yeah, yeah. And so the idea really is that it's encouraging studios to get on this kind of route map, really, to kind of decarbonize. And what's fantastic is it's also created a bit of a sort of a kind of a community amongst studios that have participated where they're sort of also sharing best practice with each other. What are the kind of robust policies that studios can have in place that will encourage the clients they work with to kind of be more sustainable? I think I think at first there was a nervousness that studios couldn't always dictate how clients worked at their
Mm,
facility. I think people were worried that if you sort of were sort of too strict, then people might go elsewhere. But actually, I don't think that's the case. I think most producers are wanting to sort of work more sustainably, and I think they find it helpful to work in a facility where there is a framework to support that.
mm,
And
mm,
so I think it's really positive. And it's really interesting how Sky Studios Elstree, for example, who got an outstanding rating last year with the studio standards. They've got very strict policies in place for what you can do at Sky Studios Elstree. They have a really strong policy around not using single-use plastics on a
mm,
production there. They also mandate that you can't use diesel in any generators at that facility. You can only use HVO. And I think when a studio lays down those ground rules, I think it's really easy then for a production to sort of comply with that, and it then helps the production reduce its own footprint as well.
mm,
So the studio standard has been nothing other than positive. It's an international standard. There are studios in America, Canada, um, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Spain, and the UK, all participating with this. And I think there were sort of 30 studios that were sort of participating last year. So hopefully, as it enters its third year, that this year it'll kind of continue to grow and
mm,
pick up a momentum, which then just allows studios to sort of kind of join the family really. And
mm,
so it's good. And I think it's robust. It requires effort and work, and that can be challenging because studios they range in sort of size and scale. Some of the bigger studios can have um support, corporate sustainability support, but on the other end of the scale there are some studios that literally have a security person, a receptionist, and a sort of facilities manager, and they've
mm,
got very small teams and staff. So for them it can be quite challenging, sort of gathering the data and sort of working out
mm.
what to do. But
So are these they're like so the sound stages, their broadcast facilities, kind of what is the I guess
yeah,
what's the
the
character of the
this
studio for the participants?
the studio standard is able to kind of deal with either large film sound stages, or a sort of more of a traditional broadcast facility where you might do sort of live projects from. So they have a range of different sizes that are participating in it. And it doesn't really matter whether you're a small or a big studio, the things that you can do apply across the board, I think. And
Mm,
and again, where I think the standard is really helpful is that by creating this framework, it kind of shows studios, the path that they can go on. And again, one of the first things I would say is just having a framework in position for gathering robust data. You know, we all, if you're in a studio, you all have to pay a utility bill to be on mains electricity. So just make sure you're kind of recording how much you use and keeping a record of it, so you can sort of see what your electricity usage is over time and how you can find ways of reducing that. You
mm,
know, we've all got sort of waste that we have to dispose of. So make sure you track your waste and make sure you know what happens to it and where it goes. So
mm.
so yeah.
There was a at the Flint we had I'd run across an article that was a memo, and I think it was from Jack Warner or one of those kind of old hardcore studio heads from from the classic days of Hollywood, and he sent a memo around to everybody about how much energy the studio was using and complaining about why don't we turn the lights off? I've just went past the costume department and the lights are still on, and it would have just this angry memo that he sent out to everybody in the studio about how they were wasting electricity.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, isn't it? I mean, the we get very forgetful in the workplace. I think it's not our energy, is it? So whatever you might be doing at home to sort of keep your energy bills down, I think it's very easy in a
Mm,
workplace to sort of get lazy and keep lights on unnecessarily.
mm,
So, a man ahead of his time, really, I guess, from a
Yes.
sustainability perspective.
Or it came from a background where being thrifty meant the difference between being on the streets or not, I guess. Um,
I was once told this story about Granada Television many years ago when the UK went from black and white to color, and
mm,
a sort of complaint about how colored paint that they had to then paint sets in sort of bright colors was more expensive. And I don't know whether that's true or
mhm.
not, but I just think it's, you
Well, probably,
know,
if you came out of,
longing for the good old days and you could just use everything in tones of gray and sort of.
yeah, exactly. Um, that's really great stuff. Is there anything else you want to kind of get into we haven't covered yet? It's it's great to hear the work Picture Zero is, and I know you brought on a lot of new staff over the past couple of years,
Yeah, I
and a lot of
mean,
sort of great, like kind of, I guess, leading young lights in terms of sustainability practice. That people are doing great work out there, and it seems like they've ended up kind of coming to you to be part of your team.
yeah, what's really fascinating is that this is a sort of new sector that's growing for the industry. So the role of a sustainability manager or a sustainability coordinator is something that's quite new. And so, I think creating those roles, training people to sort of have those roles, making sure that there's a career progression for people when they want to do those roles, I think is also important. So it's been fantastic. We've got a team of around 15 people at the minute and
Mm,
at different levels. And, some of them are people that we're sort of training ourselves. Others are people that might have, you know, had a go at doing a sustainability runner's role in the past and want to kind of develop it and go further. And again, I think as we start doing this, it's creating some sort of systems that are becoming repeatable, that are becoming sort of consistent, because so that there is a sort of a method now that on a production you can sort of follow, I think, trying to define what those kind of different stages of the productions are and what kind of things you can do to intervene and make them more sustainable. And also, a lot of work, I guess, for other members, other HODs learning to work with sustainability teams for the first time. This is new to a lot of people, and I think HODs, there's a lot that HODs are learning from us that they can implement themselves in the future. But also, I think that sort of kind of being happy that they've got the support of another department that can help them go on that journey and reduce emissions.
mm,
Because we know our industry is pretty it's a hard industry to work in. You work long hours, you're always against tight schedules and tight budgets, and you don't always have the bandwidth to sort of think about new ways of working. We tend to be stuck in our old habits, don't we? And so
mm.
changing behavior, I think is a process that's slow. But what's been interesting is just in the last 2 years seeing what a big impact we're having. And then the other thing that we do a lot of at Picture Zero, which is really important, is cast engagement.
Mm.
One of the things that's fascinating is that um, although Albert has been running for 12 years or so, um, agents and cast, very few of them really know what Albert is all about, or that even that their production is kind of doing Albert footprints, because we've traditionally never had those conversations with cast, so all this stuff is going on in the background and cast are unaware of it. And so what we're now doing is routinely, as well as HOD kickoff calls, we'll do cast kickoff calls. So we'll
Mm.
join a script read through, for example, and then have a session with cast members about sustainability, how they can support the production with its goals. And that makes a huge difference. It's we at Picture Zero, we sort of say it's playground politics because, you know, um, if the most popular kid in the playground is doing something, then everybody else kind of sees it and wants to do it as well. And the truth is, on most productions, the most popular kid in the playground is usually the star of the show.
Mm.
So if they're engaged with sustainability, then just the fact that they are saying it's important to them, it means that others in the cast and crew take notice, and you get greater engagement. So we've had some really good sort of impacts of working with the sort of lead actor on productions and getting them engaged. And
Mm,
I did a briefing recently to I thought it was an HOD briefing to a crew on a new drama production a few weeks back, and unknown to me, the star of the show was also on the Zoom with their camera turned off, listening. And at the end of that production, she has now sort of sent a recording to all the fellow cast members and sort of said how, how they need to listen to it and sort of
mm.
learn about it and support it, which is brilliant. So spreads the word.
It's the sort of the microcosm of the actual film industry in terms
Yeah.
of its its influence on the bigger population. If it's the if we see all the glamorous people that we love to hear their stories and they're doing something sustainable, we're like, well,
And then
seems like a good
hopefully
idea.
that filters into social media and channels. And, if a cast member kind of just sort of posts something about sustainability, then hopefully, their fan base start to sort of see it and start thinking about it differently as well. So yeah,
And I guess
it's good.
that it becomes that part of what movie making is, rather than you're trying to like, how do we make this movie and wedge sustainability into it, but still do what we
Hmm,
have always done. Instead, maybe sustainability is actually what you do on a movie set, which would be really
absolutely.
great to see that, like, oh, well, movie making, let's see what they do because they do sustainable stuff there in the movies. I've heard about this.
Yeah. And, every sector is on this kind of race to net zero, whether it's banking, kind of retail, education, we're all trying to kind of reduce our footprints and get to net zero. So, our sector is just as important as any other. But of course, the difference we have is that, there are two aspects. It's how we make our content. We need to make it as sustainably as possible, but also we have this huge opportunity in telling stories to influence change and to,
Mm,
I often say that, climate scientists and politicians can't solve the climate crisis on their own. They need the creative industries to help them, because actors, writers, musicians, storytellers, we have an ability to make an emotional connection with audiences. And, those emotional connections, we can change someone's attitude or perception in a heartbeat. We can, that water cooler moment of, talking about something you've seen on TV the night before in the office the next day. We have an ability to change hearts and minds in an instant, whereas politicians can take several years to kind of
mm.
try and change through kind of legislation. So I think, we're a secret weapon in solving the climate crisis.
Amazing.
That's
Well, great. Well, Steve, thanks so much for your time.
pleasure.
Great to hear about what's going on with you and Picture Zero, and I'm really excited to see what's next for Picture Zero and how things unfold in the next couple of years with you guys.
Fantastic. Brilliant, Neil. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.